A man stepped into the highest position of the Catholic Church. No scandal, no noisy speech, just small actions, but enough to cause shock from the Vatican to the smallest parish. People did not argue about what he preached, but were stunned by what he quietly did. Cardinals were confused, bishops were silent, and millions of Catholics from the world began to wonder. Is this the revolution we have been waiting for? You are about to discover 10 unprecedented changes, starting with a pair of bare feet, a locked garden, and a man who carries in his heart the memories of blood, dust, and prayers under a tree. If you believe that God still works through humble people, please like this video. If you believe that faith is not just in words but in actions, please comment where you're watching this video from, for what is about to be told concerns all of us. And now, let me tell you the first thing that Pope Leo did that silenced the whole church. Part 1. Walking barefoot humility shocks the church. Can you imagine this? A bishop who used to travel in luxury cars and live in stately mansions now has to walk barefoot on dusty streets where needles are thrown in the corners of walls, and where children play under makeshift streetlights. Not once for the image, not in an air-conditioned church, but once a year, every bishop in the world must march barefoot in real communities where real people are suffering. The reason behind this controversial order, we have to go back many years, when Leo XIV was still just Father Robert, a young missionary in the Peruvian countryside. One day a little boy ran to him, tears glistening in the burning sun. "My little sister is dying. The village priest has died. Please help me." Father Robert did not hesitate. He followed the boy, but the road to the village was a real challenge. The rocks were sharp as knives. The sand was hot as coal. Thorns grew horizontally as if they wanted to tear the skin. The boy was barefoot, and he understood. No one in this village had shoes. So he took off his shoes and walked away. Blood flowed with every step, every stone, every scratch, like a mark engraved deep into the soul. When he arrived, an old man took his bleeding hand, kissed it, and whispered, "Father has come, just like us. Now, we believe." From that day on, Father Robert never wore shoes where people could not wear shoes, and now, as Pope, he has not forgotten that vow of silence. He wants all leaders in the church to learn what his bare feet have taught. If you want to lead them, you must be willing to live like them. If you want to speak of God, you must step into the dust of men. Some bishops reacted violently. Others remained silent in confusion. But Leo XIV did not back down, and if you thought that was bold enough, wait until you hear what he did to the Vatican's most sacred garden, a place that has been off limits for centuries. Part 2. Vatican Garden for the Homeless. An open paradise at the Vatican is one of the most sacred and guarded places in the world. Within it lie vast, lush gardens, meticulously manicured over centuries, where every step requires permission. But then, one night, the gate opened, not to diplomats, nor to special pilgrims, but to the homeless. Pope Leo XIV ordered, every night, homeless people will be able to sleep in the Vatican gardens. They will have clean blankets, hot food, and most importantly, safety. No cameras, no press, no politicians taking pictures. Just help in silence, with dignity. The decision stunned many in the Vatican. Some said it was a slander of the sacredness of the place. But Pope Leo only said one sentence: if the Garden of Eden was meant to be shared, so should we. This was no random act. It stemmed from a haunting memory that Robert, as a student, would never forget. On a freezing Chicago street corner, after his shift at the soup kitchen, he saw an old man wrapped in newspapers, sitting shivering on the steps of a church. Robert said nothing. He just sat down next to him, silent, chill, and as Robert stood up to leave, The old man said only 6 words. "Thanks for meeting me. Don't ask for money. Don't ask for food. Just be seen. Be present, as Pope." Robert kept the promise of that silent gaze, that the invisible would be seen, even in the holiest place on earth. And if you think this is just a humanitarian act, wait until you see what the Pope did with his own people clothes. Part 3. Simple clothes, the simplicity of holy power. It is often said that clothes maketh the king. But for Pope Leo XIV, it was his refusal of the robe that made him the man. No more glittering gold and cross. No more colorful brocade cloak, studded with sequins and precious stones. Instead, just a plain white cassock, so simple that it blends in with the ordinary priests. In formal ceremonies, he still kept the traditional dress out of respect, but in every daily ceremony, every meeting, he chose humility. When photographers wanted to get close-up shots of every detail of his clothes, he asked them not to. One time, a reporter asked, "Your Holiness, why do you choose such simple clothes, even during a great mass?" And Pope Leo replied, "People do not need more clothes. They crave truth." The answer didn't come from a conference room. It came from a distant memory, from when he was an Augustinian monk. That year, at a small monastery in Peru, Robert, then a young monk, quietly served meals in the back of the room, avoiding the table of honor. He wore the same old black robe over and over again. No gold rings, no embroidered name. No one knew who he was, except the children in the village. And then, during a visit to a poor parish in the mountains, a little girl looked up at him and said, "He dresses like your father. Perhaps he loves like that." That moment was engraved in his heart. When power is hidden, the heart is revealed. When you remove the symbols of status, people dare to approach. And that is exactly what Pope Leo wanted. A pope whom the poor did not have to look up to from afar, but could call father. If you think the change stops at the surface, you will be surprised at what he does with the language of the entire church. Part 4. Inclusive language. The call of the forgotten people for centuries. Prayers in the Catholic Church have often begun with the familiar words. Dear brothers, it's traditional. It's classic. But it's also a barrier, because there are women, children, people of uncertain gender, sitting quietly in the back of the church, listening to the same opening statement over and over again. That never includes them. And then, a small, seemingly insignificant, change came from the mouth of Pope Leo XIV. Dear brothers and sisters, just 2 more words, but for someone who has felt invisible. It's more than a call. It's a welcome. Some people are angry. They say, "Are you changing the Bible? Are you weakening the church?" But he did not change the doctrine. He only changed the way he spoke to the human heart. The language of the liturgies began to become softer, more intimate. No longer believers, but all those whom he loves. No longer Orthodox believers, but the family of God everywhere. One day, after an outdoor mass under a mango tree in the South American countryside, an elderly woman approached him, tears streaming down her cheeks. She said softly, "For the first time, I heard myself in prayer." For Pope Leo, that was enough, he once said. God speaks to every heart. Our language should not be a barrier to hearing his voice. That experience began in Peru, where he served for many years there. He encountered women who had never been invited to speak in church, families who were excluded because of the way they dressed, and young people who didn't know if they were good enough to enter the holy door. Once, when asked about the real purpose of this change, he replied, "If the gospel makes someone feel abandoned, then maybe we are preaching it wrong." He doesn't speak to please. He speaks to open doors, and if those words touched his heart, wait and see what happens when this pope, looks up to the sky and thinks of the planet. Part 5. Green Vatican Initiative protecting the home of the soul. There is one thing that many people do not think about when talking about the Church. The sky is also crying out for help. Pope Leo XIV was the first to make the unprecedented statement. The Vatican will become carbon neutral by 2030. This is not a slogan. It is a commitment, a religious act. More than political or environmental. The Vatican is starting to install solar power. It is reducing plastic waste at major events. It is changing the way water is used, the way communion is celebrated, the way decorations are decorated, all with a view to preserving the earth. He explained, "We cannot preach about the soul without forgetting the house that houses it. The earth is not just a planet. It is man's first altar." The statement was born of a painful memory. Years ago, as a missionary, Robert had traveled to a village near the Amazon. He had expected to see trees, birds, and clear streams like those in the Bible. But when he got there, all he saw was ashes. Trees were burnt, rivers were polluted, children were coughing because of the thick smoke. A little girl stood in front of him, her eyes red, and said, "We can't pray under the trees anymore, because all the trees are gone." For Leo XIV, it was no longer an ecological problem. It was a spiritual pain. Because without nature, perhaps humans would also lose the last place to hear God's voice in silence. And then, from that very pain, he launched what many call an ecological revolution of faith. But the amazing thing is, he did not keep that decision at the Vatican. He wanted to spread the action to every diocese, every community, every person, right where they live. Why? For Leo XIV believed that the Church is only truly alive when power is shared and responsibility is given to the place closest to the people. And that's when the sixth change began, when the Pope decided to relinquish his own power to support the voices of local people. Part 6. Empowerment to the diocese when Rome listened until now. People have been used to every major decision in the Church must wait from Rome. Wait for approval, wait for instructions, wait for the right structure. But Pope Leo XIV saw what few in the Vatican wanted to accept. The Church could not serve the people from a distant balcony. And so he made one of the boldest decisions of his reign. Give power back to local dioceses. From now on, local bishops and priests can make decisions in accordance with their community's particular culture, language, customs, and pastoral circumstances. Some people are worried. They fear losing global unity. They say, "Where is the one Church?" But Leo just smiled and told the story of when he was a young priest, sent to serve in a mountain parish deep in Peru. No phone, no internet, no line to Rome. At first, he thought, what chaos. People there held their own masses, taught their own catechisms, performed their own funerals, baptized themselves, and even held their own prayer meetings. He once asked a village elder, "Why don't you call the diocesan office for guidance?" The old man smiled kindly. "Because God is alive here. We just need to listen to him every day." That moment changed the way Robert looked at leadership. Not orders from above, but trust from below. As Pope, he resolved, the Church is not an administrative building. The Church is a breathing, living, serving community. Since then, a series of decentralization reforms have been enacted. Local languages are used in the liturgy. Pastoral initiatives that do not require Vatican approval can still be implemented. Indigenous priests have more say. Some people think it's risky. But Leo believes, if we don't believe in our own children, how can we say we are a family of faith? And in that very empowerment, something special began to emerge. The voices of people of other faiths, previously ignored, began to be invited to the table, because Leo XIV knew that, to understand the world, One must first learn to converse with those who are different from oneself. Part 7. Interreligious dialogue. When faith is placed on a table. Not a walled Catholic Church has been round for millennia. During that time, other religions have often been viewed with suspicion, even distance. But Pope Leo XIV did not see heterodoxy. He only saw people who suffered together. In a brief but profound press conference, he declared faith should not be used to build walls, but to build tables, so we can sit down, look at each other, and listen. And then, something unprecedented happened. In many places around the world, he established interfaith councils, where Catholic priests sat at the table with Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, and even non-religious clerics, but lived with compassion. No argument, no proselytizing, no imposition. Just meetings to pray together, to discuss the poor, to plan community help, to build schools, to provide health care for people, not for religion. Many people ask, are we diluting Catholic identity? But Leo recounted a memorable one years ago, at a refugee camp in northern Peru, where people of all faiths gathered after a natural disaster. Robert, not yet Pope, sat with a Muslim nurse who had just cared for a child with pneumonia. Both sat in silence. Then they bowed their heads together, praying in their own way, in the same space, for the same life. Then the nurse said softly, "We speak to God in many different languages, but He hears the same pain." That moment, for Leo, became a life orientation, because according to him, silence between religions only creates fear. Dialogue will create hope. From Chicago, where synagogues sit next to Protestant churches, next to mosques, to Manila, Nigeria, and across Africa, Asia, tables are being set up. Tables for prayer, tables for listening. No more walls. And so a new culture of knowledge is emerging, a church that not only preaches the truth, but also listens to the truth from other voices, and in that openness, a more difficult question is being asked. How can we call on people to give if the church itself has never been transparent with them? Part 8. Financial transparency. The truth must be placed on the altar. Please donate to the church. We have heard this call countless times, but there is one thing that few dare to ask in return. Where did that money go? For many years, the Vatican's financial system was like a closed garden, very beautiful, very ancient, and very difficult for anyone to enter. But when Leo XIV became Pope, he said something that made the entire papal court hold its breath. If we ask people to give with open hearts, then we ourselves must manage those gifts with open books. Immediately, he issued a series of new regulations. All charities must be independently audited. Each diocese must publish annual financial reports, and every major expenditure, whether in the Vatican or in the poorest parish, must be transparently reported. Some insiders reacted angrily. They said it was too secular. Faith should not be run like a business. But Leo was undaunted, because he remembered very clearly the painful lesson he had experienced that year. While he was head of the Augustinian order worldwide, he discovered a large sum of money missing from a charity project in Africa. No one dared to face it. No one dared to speak out. Only he quietly sat looking at each invoice, each payment slip, each small record. When things came to light, he did not seek to place blame. He only said one sentence: money is not the problem. Silence is the problem. From then on, he vowed all truth must be placed on the altar, not hidden in a drawer. And in that transparency, not only is finance enlightened, but also trust. Many people are starting to give again, not because they are forced to, but because they believe, because they see that God does not need the biggest contribution, but the clearest sincerity. But while adults are busy debating about budgets, policies, ministry funds, there's a silent group still waiting to be heard. Young people. They're the next generation, but they are the ones least asked. What do you think about the church? And that's when Leo XIV made a change that no pope had ever made before. Part 9. Youth council listening to the unskilled adults often have long meetings, discussing faith, strategy, reform. But there is one thing they often forget. No one asks young people, what do you see? In a noisy world, young people are often seen as not understanding enough, not experienced enough, or worse, not interested. But Pope Leo XIV didn't think so. He didn't just talk to them. He listened to them. And then he made a decision that caused a stir within the church. Establish global youth councils from the Philippines to Brazil, from Nigeria to Poland. Young Catholics from different cultures, ethnicities, backgrounds are invited to participate in a special council where they are allowed to do something unprecedented. Send feedback directly to the Vatican. They were asked, what makes you feel out of place in the church? What makes you want to leave? And what makes you want to come back? Some in the Curia worry. Young people will say harsh things. Do they understand the doctrine well enough to comment? But Leo just said, if we don't listen to them when they're in church, we won't have a chance to listen to them when they leave. The memory that led him to this decision was an afternoon in Peru, when he held a small catechism class under a mango tree after Mass. He sat playing guitar, helping the children with their homework, listening to them talk about school. Then a boy about 14 years old, named Julio, suddenly asked, Father, why doesn't anyone in Rome ask us what we think? Robert was stunned. Then he smiled. Maybe, one day, they will ask. And years later, as Pope, he kept that promise. Young councils now meet online, send petitions, and come up with ideas on mental health, technology, education, and how to communicate the faith in a new age. A young girl from Nigeria said after the meeting, I never thought people in the Vatican would care about my voice. But now I know they really listen. For Leo XIV, it was not a pure gesture. It was the survival strategy of a church that wanted to survive into the next generation, because he believes that a church that speaks to young people is powerful, but a church that listens to young people will endure. And in that hope, Leo XIV closed the first series of reforms with something very ancient, but also very necessary in a wounded world. A small door, a wooden box, and a whisper, are you ready to go home? Part 10. Restoring the confessional house where the soul learns to breathe again in the modern world, where everything can be confessed online, in a digital diary, or through a short status. The confessional seems to have become a symbol of the past, an old ritual that few people want to enter anymore. But Pope Leo XIV believed, it is not the confessional that is out of date. It is we who have forgotten how to forgive. He made a strong appeal to the whole world. Every church, every parish, every priest, open the doors of the confessional once more, not just on Sundays, not just during office hours, but whenever a soul knocks. Many people are surprised. Who goes to confession these days? They can pray at home. But Leo recounted an experience that stayed with him for life. In the late 1980s, Father Robert was working in a poor parish in Peru, sitting in an old wooden confessional. It was late. He was about to leave. Then a man walked in, his shoulders as stiff as stone, his eyes downcast. He sat down, sighed for a long time, then said, I haven't confessed in 30 years, Father. Is it too late for me to be clean? Robert said nothing. He just gently placed his hand on the wooden partition and whispered, It's never too late. The man cried, and from that day on, The confessional in the parish was never empty. Years later, as Pope, Robert decided to bring about what he called forgiveness can be touched, not just heard, because he understood. People need more than just forgiveness. They need to know they are not alone in their repentance. They need a place to vent, to fall down, to learn to breathe again. And that is why he restored the confessional, not as a procedure, but as a place of healing. Some people think it's a return to tradition, but for Leo, it's a return to the roots of the gospel. Salvation is not a theory. It's an embrace in tears. 10 changes. 10 decisions in less than 3 weeks. From bare feet to the Vatican gates opened at night, from an inclusive prayer to a word of forgiveness whispered through the wooden wall. It all started with one person who once chose to walk barefoot into the pain of others, and maybe that is what the Church has forgotten, and God has never stopped reminding. 10 big changes together. But make no mistake, they're not administrative policies or canonical procedures. They are the traces of a man who lived in silence, serving in the dust, and never forgetting the most fundamental thing of the gospel. If you cannot touch the pain of others, you cannot speak of God's love. From the bleeding feet of Prue to the open gardens of the Vatican, from inclusive prayer to the silent confessional in the middle of the night, every change doesn't begin with power. It begins with a moment that is very human, very real, very divine. If you feel touched by this story, hit like to let us know you still believe in the power of quiet compassion. Please leave a comment of those 10 changes. Which one do you think about the most? And if you were the Pope, what would you do first? Please subscribe to the channel. What you just saw is just the first chapter. The story that follows is about a young priest who spent 9 years in prison, just to bring the word of God to those forgotten by society. And you know what? Sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do in this world is simply to see someone who feels invisible, to listen to someone who feels unheard, and to love someone who feels unlovable. That's what Pope Leo XIV is doing, and perhaps that's what you and I are called to begin today. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next story.